This is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another deck overview for the modern format. This time we are doing with a deck that, much like other decks, has kind of faded in the background, and that is Modern Dredge. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. Now, Dredge is much of the same ilk as decks like Tron, Jund, to a lesser extent Burn. It's a deck that has power has faded over time, as it really hasn't gotten a ton of new cards over time. One of the other things that's happened in the deck is this is a deck that's gone through a number of bannings, losing both the card Faithless, Looting, and Golgari Grave Troll on multiple occasions. Grave Troll allows you to dredge one deeper than any card currently in existence in the format, and Faithless Looting was kind of a flashbackable dredge enabler for the deck, as well as seeing a bunch of cards on potentially turn 2 or turn 3. What the deck does have now, however, is a bunch of very powerful enablers in Cathartic Reunion and Thrilling Discovery. The templating on these cards fits really nicely with the deck. Unlike cards like Faithless Looting or Careful Study, you actually discard the cards first, then draw the cards, enabling you to dredge or flip over a bunch of cards. For those of you that aren't aware what the dredge mechanic is, basically it's an ability that says instead of drawing a card, you put that many cards in your library, and then this deck is designed to play off of those kind of effects. So in order to dredge, you have things like Stinkweed Nymph that dredges for 5, Golgari Thug that dredges for 3, Dark Blast that dredges for 3 as well, or Golgari Thug dredges for 4. And then previously the deck used to play Life from Malone when it was able to be a little bit more conservative, but now with the addition of Cathartic Reunion, Thrilling Discovery, it really no longer has a need to do that. Other recent innovations are playing at things like Otherworldly Gaze and Tome Scour that just puts a bunch of cards in the graveyard, and then, beyond that, you have a bunch of things that play off of that. Creeping Chill is a card that when it happens to get milled over, you can exile it and deal 3 damage to your opponent, gaining 3 life in the process. This helps to trigger a card called Silver Smoot Ghoul, which allows you to basically get a 3/1 for free at the end of the turn that you gain life. Prized Amalgam is another card that plays nicely from the graveyard. Basically, anytime a creature comes from your graveyard into play, Prized Amalgam gets a trigger on the stack, and then at the beginning of the next end step, it comes into play tapped. Narcomoeba is a card that as you're flipping cards over, it puts a trigger on the stack that allows it to enter play immediately, also triggering your prized amalgams, etc. And then Oxybogonus is another card that once in the graveyard, you can exile 8 other cards and then basically have another Cathartic Reunion or Thrilling Discovery, kind of a slower way of getting around the loss of Faithless Looting for the deck. The deck happens to be very good against fair mid-range strategies, and tends to struggle when Graveyard Hate or combo decks are at a premium. There really aren't a whole lot of hard combo decks left in the format. Basically, you have decks like Hammer Time, Amulet Titan, and such, decks that are not true spell-based combo that this deck can't really interact with, although those matchups can certainly be tricky. It tends to play well into fairer formats, things like Murktide, things like 4-color Control. Now, obviously, there are cards that can play against it, things like Endurance, things like Rest in Peace, Leyline of the Void, etc. So, when Living End tends to be on the rise, this deck takes a little bit of a hit. But, if people are trying to split their Cascade Hate and playing things like Void Mirror, Chalice, Flusterstorm, and not going after actual hard graveyard hate, Dredge can still rise and do a pretty recent job. It also happens to have a very good matchup against one of the better aggressive decks in the format in Burn because of Creeping Chill. So overall, this is a deck that tends to function very well when the format tends to be more fair and Graveyard Hate is at a low point. Now this kind of is more of a pick your spot deck anymore than it used to be. This is a deck that used to be a tier 1 or tier 1.5 strategy, and it's kind of faded in the background to where, much like Tron, sometimes you can pick a weekend and this deck can do particularly well. As far as the sideboard, you're generally broken down into your anti-hate cards and your cards to answer specific things. Leyline of Sanctity happens to be good against decks like Burn and Discard Outlets, but is mainly here for things like Endurance and targeted Graveyard Hate, like Soul Guide Lantern and Nihil Spellbomb, those kind of effects. Portable Hole is a nice flexible thing that allows you to answer early creatures like Ragavan, while also dealing with some of the early graveyard hate pieces like the notable Soul Guide Lantern, Nihil Spellbomb, Escafex, Rest in Peace, etc. Path to Exile as a kind of catch-all against any type of hate permanent you might run into as far as creatures. Also slows down your opponent's aggression a little bit. 3 copies of Nature's Claim and 3 copies of Wear Tear, kind of a catch-all against both graveyard hate pieces such as Leyline of the Void or Rest in Peace, and can also tag things like Blood Moon, which your deck can sometimes struggle to operate under if you don't happen to be able to get your dredging going early on. Stomping Ground is interesting as another fetchable land to bring in whenever you're bringing in your Nature's Claims, and Gemstone Cavern is another way to get the deck, especially when it's on the draw, to go a little bit faster. This version is obviously very similar. You're still seeing a lot of the same cards, other than you're not seeing Tome Scour in this particular version. So the main deck is largely the same, although you're playing Merchant of the Veil here in this particular version, which is yet another draw discard outlet. Very similar to what Faithless Suiting used to be of the deck. This is in turn 1 enabler to let you get going a little bit earlier. Other versions have played, there was a artifact that I don't really think sees play anymore that basically mills you for 2. For the first 3 turns. You get to tap it, mill 3, tap it, mill 2, tap it, mill 2. You used to see play in the deck, so this deck has definitely undergone a lot of changes. Conflagrate, another card that happens to be in the sideboard, used to be in the main deck, was very good when creature-based decks were a little bit heavier, but obviously the format's a little bit less about creature-based decks, and a little bit more about mid-range resilient decks, so, as far as that's going on. Main deck, once again, not really too much going on here other than the Gemstone Caverns are in the main deck of this version instead of the sideboard, so things are a little bit different. Mana is definitely a little bit stretched these days as you're trying to cast 4 different colors worth of spells, because in some games you're going to have to cast your Prized Amalgams and Narcomoebas to try to get this beatdown plan going if your opponent happens to have Graveyard Hate against you. As far as the sideboard, seeing a lot of the same tools. Prismatic Ending, yet another catch-all answer against all the graveyard hates. Portable Hole, same thing that we already talked about. Leyline of Sanctity, we've already kind of covered. Leyline of the Void for kind of the mirror match. Living End also might bring it in against Murktide, just to slow their Murktides down and such, but primarily here for the mirror match and for Living End. Conflagrate, good against creature-based decks. Also another discard enabler for your various dredge effects. You can pay XX and flash it back from the graveyard to discard X cards. And then Ancient Grudge, yet another anti-hate piece. You can also bring this in against the Urza Saga decks or Hammer Time. Wear Tear, once again, also kind of your catch-all answer in a lot of these versions. This version, again, not a whole lot different going on here, other than you're not seeing the copies of Merchant of the Veil. Instead, you're still relying on Cathartic Reunion, Thrilling Discovery, or Otherworldly Gaze and Tome Scour to get you going in the early turns. Creeping Chill, obviously, still very key to the rest of the deck, especially with the Silver Snoot Ghouls. Sideboard, you're seeing some Thought Seizes to disrupt your opponent's hate pieces in their early turns. Wear Tear, once again, kind of the catch-all to deal with your opponent's stuff. Ancient Grudges to deal with any type of artifact nonsense, especially the Urza Saga decks, the hate pieces they might have. Gemstone Cavern to speed you up, and the Stomping Ground as you got another land to be able to cast your spells, as well as flashback your Ancient Grudges and such. As far as the deck's positioning in the format, as I've already kind of mentioned, it's nowhere near as strong as it used to be. It's a deck that hasn't gotten many tools of late. I'm sure you have things like Otherworldly Gaze, Tome Scour, which are kind of more recent innovations for the deck, but no longer has the busted things of like Golgari, Grave Troll, Kogak, and these overwhelmingly powerful cards that's lost over time, as well as losing Faithless Looting, and then you combine that with the fact that the fairer decks of the format, your Izzet Murktides, your Urion pile, Omnath piles, all of those decks have gotten significantly better over time, and there are constantly more and more graveyard heat pieces. There's endurances, there's all the various different spellbomb effects, the Soul Guide Lanterns, the Relic of Progenituses, the Rest in Pieces. Basically, if you want to beat this deck, you can. But it's one of those decks that it can pick its spots, and when the meta is at a kind of this fair point, and also Living End is not a particularly high point for force people to have graveyard hate, this is a deck that can pop up, win some matches, and potentially being in the running for winning a challenge or something on a given weekend. That said, it's usually not a deck that does well when people are prepared for it. And the hate for it's a little bit more reasonable than playing hate against something, say like Burn, which requires a little bit more specificity with like liking and such. On this deck, you just happen to be packing Graveyard Hate for Murktide and Living End, and happen to catch Dredge and kind of the catch-all. Obviously, targeted graveyard heat is a little bit less powerful because this deck can sometimes rebuild and start dredging again. So things like endurances or spell bombs are a little bit worse overall as far as slowing the strategy down as things like rest in pieces and leyline the voids. That said, it's often going to have more answers to those kind of things. Your wear tears, your nature's claims, your ancient grudges. But still packing some amount of graveyard hate's nice overall. Another card that hits it a little bit is Sanctifier and Vec, because a lot of its cards are black, other than your Narcobeavas and such. So it's a card that a deck like Burn or say mono white Hammer Time might play, or if someone's still playing Death and Taxes, another card you might have to play around, and you really don't have too many outs to it. Hence why something like Portable Hole is seeing play in some number of numbers. But deck does have a stretch mana base. Compared to what it used to be. It basically used to be like a 2 or 3 color deck. Now it's basically a 4 color deck. It's a full 5 color deck after the sideboard. But it's a deck with a stretch mana base. You're taking a lot of damage from your lands. You do have some recovery mechanics and Creeping Chill. And you have this kind of bad beatdown plan where you can cast your Prize Amalgams and Silver Spoon Ghouls and Narcomoebas if your opponent goes all in, like molds to 3 or 4 looking for graveyard hate. You might be able to get there with a Motley Crew beatdown, but this is definitely a deck that definitely prefers to be doing its stuff out of the graveyard and can certainly have some explosive starts, especially with a Thrilling Discovery or Cathartic Reunion going early, or Otherworldly Gaze milling over a Stinkweed Imp, helping you to mill a bunch of cards, and eventually hitting an Ox and kind of having these huge turns. So this is a deck that is capable of having some explosive turns. It's certainly a deck capable of killing you by turn 4, but its power is really its resilience in the face of a bunch of removals and such, and really doesn't care about like your opponent solituding one of their creatures or furying a couple of their creatures when they can just come right back. But if they back that with an Endurance or a Rest in Peace, it's kind of a different story. But overall, this is a deck you should be aware of, and a deck that does have a very proud history in the modern format, even if I'm a little bit salty playing against it as a burn player since Creeping Chill was burned. But overall, this is a deck that's a lot of fun to see every once in a while. Not a deck you want to be running into every round, but a deck that pops up every now and again. So you should be certainly aware of and can certainly win an event given the right circumstances. As always, this is John for MTG Nexus. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for the next video.